Hi, I'm Josh McDonald.
And I'm Miranda Materi, and we are Hand Therapy Academy.
Let's cover a little bit of a delicate subject today. Let's go over something that we could get ourselves in a little bit of trouble with. Let's talk about dogma in the therapy world.
Yeah, so I think Josh and I talk about this sometimes because I think we share a lot of like clinical stories that we have with other providers, or we look for each other to support when something happens. So we were talking about this as a topic, and I know that everyone has probably experienced it, been on the receiving or the giving end, right? Like I think as hand
Mhm.
therapists, sometimes we can be a little bit nitpicky about, I don't know if I want to say nitpicky, but more particular about stuff that matters to us. Um, so I thought we could share some of our clinical experiences and how we can handle these in maybe a different way or in a way that better serves our patients. Because at the end of the day, it's really the patient that probably is on the receiving end of it, or the one that's going to have the problems associated with it, not us as therapists or the other person that was doing the recommendations.
Yeah. So I'll go first. My experience recently was with a wound care nurse who was doing home health with a patient. This patient had a mangling hand injury with amputation on site of the injury of small finger and index finger later was not salvageable and necrotic. He ended up with a large graft from his forearm to the ulnar side of the hand because of that injury. A lot of adipose tissue. It was padded heavily, and the distal edge of it. I mean, it was proud of the base of the hand by probably an inch and a quarter, and probably 4 inches in longitudinal length. So it was very bulbous, and the distal end of it was black and necrotic. First time I saw him, I was the second of our therapists to see him in our clinic. First time I saw him, I take off this giant elbow to fingertip Curlex dressing, and I'm expecting when he comes in to see this disastrous forearm and hand, and I start unwrapping, and there's nothing on the forearm that's wrong except xeroform everywhere. Even on the graft donor site that is now in the remodeling stage of healing, he has xeroform. He has xeroform on the dorsum of the hand on the radial side with no injuries. He has xeroform on the palm of the hand that has scar that is now mature and contracting, but not open. And he has xeroform all over this now nearly fully macerated ulnar graft. And I said, listen, we got to change this entirely. I said, how much of this xeroform do you have? Like, oh, I have a home health nurse. She comes in and does wound care. And so I said, let's progress this. You don't need this anymore. That may have been necessary initially, but your wound has progressed. We need to progress our protocol with this. So I did one by 8 inch piece of xeroform that was around the interface between the graft and his native skin. And it kind of traveled around palmar, the distal aspect, and back down the dorsal aspect, and was plenty in one piece. And then I gauze wrapped him. I didn't use any other xeroform or anything, and he was moving great. He was free. I used the stretch rolled gauze, not Curlex, so it wasn't as bulky. And I got a call maybe an hour and a half later because the wound care nurse had shown up to his house to do the normal wound care. And I was on a three-way with the case manager, the wound care, and myself. And the wound care nurse was ticked off. She's like, why didn't you put all this stuff on him? Why did you tell him not to do this anymore? The doctor asked for wet wound dressings with xeroform and all this stuff. And I said, when did the doctor ask for that? Oh, that was back at his first post-op. I said, that was 4 weeks ago. He's progressed. He doesn't need it on. And I listed all the stuff. She's like, yes, but that eschar on the distal end, she says, that needs to be softened with xeroform. I said, it's not eschar, it's necrotic. She's like, well, then she started throwing credentials at me. I said, okay, if we wanted, and I was trying to be as diplomatic as I could because I knew the case manager was on the call with us. And so it just became this trying to find a happy medium. And I said, all right, let's put xeroform on the distal end on the eschar. Let's put a little bit on that seam, but he doesn't need it on all these other surfaces.
Yeah, and so what was the nurse happy with that resolution, or
I'd say she was content. Although the next visit he came back, he was wrapped all up in xeroform again, like and
oh,
acrylic. It's like, yeah.
interesting.
And so the dogma side of this that we're talking about, and that can be a very negative connotation, is that sometimes we all get stuck in a pathway, like a rut, and saying like, these are the products I'm supposed to use. This is what the doctor asked for. I'm doing that until he says something different. But if I put him in the same dressings for 4 weeks between follow-up visits, I'm not letting that wound mature and progress and develop in a way that it should. I should adapt my treatment style, my wound care dressings, all of that as the patient progresses to help them advance before that next doctor's visit.
Yeah. And then now looking back since you got that phone call, what would you do anything different?
That's a good question. I think, like, I knew going into the decision when I told the patient, wound care nurse is going to show up. She's going to put everything back on you. I said, don't let her do it because look how wet this is. So I knew walking into this exactly what I
You
was
were
doing.
like bringing on a fight, yeah.
Yeah, I was stepping into the ring for it. I didn't expect the three-way call, but honestly, I'm okay with it because then the nurse case manager got to hear the back and forth of this decision-making process. So I don't know that I would have done anything different. Honestly, I kind of did it again when I told a follow-up therapist, just put Adaptic, no more Xeroform. Stop putting Xeroform on him. Hand him 5 packs of Adaptic. Tell him to use little pieces as needed. And so we advanced him on, and then the nurse case manager discharged the home health wound care. She's like, I don't think he needs any more. He could have been doing that all by himself all
Yeah.
along. I think that was enabling him to be passive about it.
Yeah, that's probably true. I had a similar situation with a similar nurse and a nurse case manager. It was a patient that had his transmetacarpal amputation, so he lost his index through small finger. And I called the nurse probably like 3 or 4 times, and she never called me back. I was trying to be proactive and ask more of a question like, "Hey, what do you think about us changing this and doing it a little bit differently than what you did?" But they never got back to me, and I changed it, and there were no ramifications from that. I guess I got lucky on mine, but
Yeah,
my
yeah,
response was going to be, well, I tried to call you to talk about it, but you didn't answer. So
yeah, yeah,
I think in these situations, I have a similar situation with a patient from the burn unit. We were having to use hand sanitizer to get the prosthetic on. And there was no other way for the patient to get it on other than us changing or the prosthetist changing to like a pair, like they put the parachute on to don the prosthetic,
yeah,
um, which wasn't really an option at that point in time. And the hand sanitizer was drawing out the the burn, right? So
yeah,
then they were upset that that I was like saying we had to put hand sanitizer to get on, and they're like, well, we don't want that. And but there was really the option was spending however many more thousands of dollars to switch the way that we don the prosthetic, and that ended up happening. But I was thinking, is that really worth it? Could we get like a moisturizing hand sanitizer or something like that to use instead?
yeah, yeah. And I think I've had one prosthetist give a patient this like $800 little squeeze bottle of a silicone lubricant that's intended for that. But the guy's like, I don't want to use this stuff because it's ridiculously expensive. He says, I'm just using hand sanitizer. He wasn't a burn patient and had old mature wounds, so it wasn't as big a deal. But yeah, sometimes getting, whether it's someone in a different discipline or maybe even other hand therapists that you work with, to say like, hey, there's other ways to work around this issue. We like to say in Hand Therapy Academy, there's lots of right answers to the same question sometimes. So lots of, usually clinically, not anatomy necessarily, but lots of ways to solve a problem that can all be good options.
Yeah, and I think communication is key, right? Like a lot of times we don't know what they're going to be unhappy about, right? I think, we've learned over the years what things might set certain providers off. So we kind of know those things, but also just communicating with them. And I always try to phrase when I'm not fully agreeing with what the plan of care is, I try to call the physician and identify what I think the problem might be and then ask them for suggestions as well. And then I offer mine. So it doesn't seem like I'm telling them what to do and they're telling me what to do. It's more of a team approach.
Yeah. And maybe I should have reached out to that nurse, that wound care nurse proactively. But in the moment, I figured, just let's do this now. So maybe that would have been a more diplomatic approach for me to have taken. But yeah,
Yeah, I don't know. We are who we are, though, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. All right. Well, I'm sure you've experienced something like that. Maybe you're on the receiving end, maybe you're on the giving end of some of that therapy dogma that we were talking about. So if you have those kinds of things, definitely share them below in the comments. Reach out to us if you have any questions. Our social media handles, Hand Therapy Academy, or our email info@handtherapyacademy.com.
Yeah, we'd love to hear about yours.